Hi there, this is Robin Andrews from Computer Academy, where we teach you about programming and computer science in a fun and accessible way. Now, in the last video, we looked at GitHub and also a brief look at Git itself, which is different from GitHub, and we talked about the difference a little bit. So in this video, we're going to look at Git itself, okay? Now, if you're on GitHub and you find a repository that you would like to copy onto your machine or clone onto your machine, then in the last video I showed you, you could click on this green button, clone or download, and you could download a zip file that contains the entire repository, which is great. But also, if you want to get into using Git itself, then there's another option, which is you copy the URL. Okay, so you can click that button there. That's this URL here, highlighted in blue. So you can copy that to the clipboard. And then you can use Git itself from a terminal such as the PowerShell or CMD on Windows, or Bash or something like that on Mac or Linux. And then you can clone it from the command line, okay? Now, in order to do that, you need to have Git installed. So to start using Git itself as a version control system, you need to install Git on your system. Now, on Windows, the way to do that is to go to this URL, which I simply found by searching from Google for Git Windows, Git, yeah, Git for Windows, actually, that's the one. And then you get the, basically the full one, the main one. Now it should be fine. You just download the executable installer, you run it, and you basically accept all of the default arguments. Now there's a couple of things about that might trip you up. So I've already installed Git on my system, so I'm not going to go through that process again. But if you get stuck, there's loads of articles. For example, this one here is very good, very simple, Computer Hope. I'll put the link in the description. And it talks about how to install Git. So you need to go through that. But the basic idea is just to accept all the defaults. So for example, when you get to this point, you do want to allow Git from the command line. So you leave that selected. Okay. So install it. Sometimes it goes really smoothly and that's great. Sometimes it takes a bit more digging and a bit of research to find out why, in your particular case, there's a problem. And that's just one of those kind of general skills that you need to develop as you get into computing in general. But that said and done, you get this installed and then you'll be good to go. So what you can then do is you can open up a PowerShell. These days that's the modern shell that people use on Windows. And there's many ways of doing that. You can use your start menu, or you can use Windows and R. I'm going to do that here. And I'm going to type in PowerShell. So that's the Windows key along with R. Okay. And then you type in PowerShell and that should open up PowerShell for me. Now you're going to need to be a little bit familiar with some kind of shell or terminal in order to be able to do this. So if this is totally new to you, then I suggest you go away and you look at command line interfaces for your system, whether it's Windows or Mac or whatever. Yeah. Okay, so here I've got the PowerShell open, and I'm now going to CD, that means change directory, into desktop, because that's where I do most of my temporary work before I store it away somewhere more tidily, right? Then I think we're good to go if I just get that URL. Don't think it's still on my clipboard. Oh, it is still on my clipboard. Okay, that's fine. So I can then do Git, because I've got Git installed, right? So I can use Git commands, and I've put Git in my path, which means I can run it from my command line, from PowerShell, right? Git clone, and then that URL, okay? This is literally going to create a folder with all of the entire repo in it, including the Git file, which is normally a hidden file that contains all the information about versions, etc. Okay. So then you can see it's cloned it onto my desktop, okay, and it's called 15 Puzzle Python. So I can then change into that if I select that folder name and I do CD into that folder name. Okay, I'm now in there, so I can then list. Yeah, I can then list. You can see it's there. Right? I've got my folder called number images, and I've got my PNG and my .py file. This all came from what was sitting there on GitHub. Okay, so this repository, the repositories on GitHub, it's now been cloned locally onto my machine. So it means you don't have to download a zip file and extract it or anything like that. And it also means you use your first Git command, which is git clone, and that's a really useful command. Okay, let's do some other stuff though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do start dot. Okay, that opens Explorer in the current location. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to delete everything that's in here. Okay, so I've now I've got rid. Okay, I don't always recommend doing this unless you really know what you're doing. Okay, so I've deleted the Git folder itself, which means I've lost everything. Okay, so one of the things about having version control is if you lose some stuff, you delete a file by accident, you've actually got a record of everything you've done within your version control system, so you can undo that kind of damage, but not if you do what I just did and delete the folder. But I'm doing this for a different purpose, which is to show you how to initiate a Git repository. Okay, so let's just create a new file. So I'm using Notepad++ here, which I strongly recommend you get if you're on Windows. It's a great editor to have. And let's just create a file. And let's just save it in that folder that I just created. So that was on my desktop, and it was called the 15 puzzle, I believe. And I'm going to call this README. Okay, and it's got the extension MD, which stands for Markdown. Now, Markdown is a really good format, which I'm not going to go into details here. Just to make you aware of it, it's used for README files, okay? And just to give you a basic idea, it means you can use like a pound sign or a hashtag, whatever you call it, in your country for the heading 1. That's the biggest type of heading. So this is the 15 in Python, okay? And then you can just have normal text. And you can do things like lists. Okay, I'm not going to go into details about Markdown because that's a whole topic in itself. But like I say, it's used for README files on GitHub. That's a big use of it, okay? And so it's worth knowing just for that reason. Okay, we don't need those items for this. Okay, so what's going on? I've saved that. So now if I go to my PowerShell here, right, I can now do ls, which is, I mean, you could do dir if you're really into Windows commands, but ls is acceptable as well. Oh dear, what have I called it? I've called it reradme. Okay, that was a bit stupid, wasn't it? Typing is not my strong point, unfortunately. Okay, so I just renamed that because it was badly typed. Apologies for that. Okay, so at the minute we're inside a folder. It's got nothing to do with Git yet because we haven't initialized it as a Git repository. Okay, so we're just inside a normal folder and it's got one file in it, okay, called readme.md. Now, to make this into a Git repository, I do git init. Okay, that means initialize. Okay, so now there is a Git thing there, and you can actually look into that, and you can see all these different things. But you never need to dig in there. You know, I've never had to myself. Very rarely you're going to need to dig in there. So that's why it's a hidden file. But I've got my hidden files showing. That's why it's actually displaying. Okay, so that's, you can see that's now a Git repository. But at the minute, if I do git status, come on, if I do git status, you can see I've got an untracked file. Now, the whole business about tracking and staging and all of that is a little bit of a learning curve. So I'm not going to go into it too much now, but basically at the minute, the file is sitting in the same folder, but it hasn't been added to the repository. And probably one of the most common commands you're going to use is git add dot. And what that means is take everything in the folder and add it to the Git repository. Yeah, so it's then being tracked. So there is, at the minute, it's sitting there, but it hasn't actually been committed. Okay, it's been added to the repository, but it hasn't been committed. So now we're going to do git commit. Okay, commit m, and then the name, usually called first, or often called first commit. Okay, so now at this stage, I now actually have a repository on my machine. It's not remote. It's not connected with GitHub or anything like that. But I am now tracking changes, so I can then, as I build my project out, I can regularly do git add dot, okay, and then commit it. And then if there's ever a problem, like I break some file or something, I want to go back to a previous point, I can use all the various git commands to, go back to a previous point. I can, exclude or include certain things from the repository depending on what I want to do. It's a whole kind of mini language of its own, the different things that you can do with Git. But this is a good start. If you can get this far, so you can initialize a repository, you can add your untracked files to it, and you can make a commit, then you've gone a long way already. And also prior to that, we also looked at cloning from a remote repository, which is also a very useful thing to be able to do. Okay, so like I say, this is by no means like an expert class in Git, but it is a starting point. And I encourage you to get to the point where doing this little sequence of operations becomes almost second nature to you. You know, and there's a little bit of prep you need to do that. So you're going to need to be able to use PowerShell or Terminal or Bash, whatever command line interface you want to use, and, you know, navigate through your directories using CD, for example, to get to the directory you want to. You know, some basics of command line interfaces: get Git installed, clone remote repositories onto your local machine, and create initialize Git repositories on your local machine. And then you've really got the basics down, okay? One thing we haven't done is showing you how to connect a local repository to GitHub and to kind of flow between the two. That's a little bit more advanced. I'll probably do that in an upcoming video soon. But yeah, that's basically it. So don't forget to subscribe. Also, please subscribe to the CompuAcademy mailing list if you're interested. I'll put a link in the description. Other than that, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.